back now with top 10 morally reprehensible 1960s movies. So I'm going all the way back. I mean, I've got the 50s to do, the 40s, the 30s, and the silent era. So there's quite a few still left to do in this crazy list. So it's not even near over yet. So if you like it, that's good. If you're thinking, why is he doing this? There's still lots to come. Okay, so as you probably guessed by this point, if you've watched these videos, it's not about what I think is the most morally reprehensible ones. It's what was viewed as reprehensible and why it's interesting these were viewed as reprehensible at the time, and moving on with that. So I can have some fun with it, but yeah. I've avoided now going into the ones my pet hates now of bad films. That joke's ran its course. So, number 10 is Belle Du Jour. Now, even though the 70s was the easiest list possible, you still got enough of the stuff in the 60s to, it's not that difficult to choose the 60s ones either. I mean, after this, it became much more a case of paying more attention to what was going on and studying things a bit more. Even though I already knew most of them, it was just like, this was the last time it was pretty easy to do a list. Because the 60s and 70s are just so easy. So Belle Du Jour is Louis Buñuel. I made sure I only did one Buñuel film here. I could have gone further. Belle Du Jour is a wonderful film about sex and prostitutes and a married woman who becomes a prostitute because she's unsatisfied in her sex life. And it's hilarious, it's surreal, it's absurd. It makes people uncomfortable looking at like what men want from women, what women want from men, and what women want from life, and just the absurdity of life and absurdity of the beliefs, and just how people are and how people are trying to portray themselves compared to what they actually are. Like how we're a lot less civilized and we try and portray ourselves to society, and it's a full-on assault on good manners by Buñuel, which something he did a lot. So I couldn't have chosen any Buñuel film, but I thought Belle Du Jour was one people know of more, and it is such an obvious good one to bring up. Yes, I will eventually go into that Buñuel series. I'm getting there. I'm just a lot scared of doing it. And so next is The War Game, which is the number 9. This is the Peter Watkins film about nuclear war. I've covered this in a video before. It was banned by the BBC because it was too controversial, it was too accurate, and it pretty much said, if we have a nuclear war, we're dead. Like, you're not surviving it. Even Threads looks optimistic compared to this one. This one's brutal. You're going to be depressed pretty quickly when you watch this one. Number 8, we're staying in nuclear weapons with Dr Strangelove, which is Stanley Kubrick. It's one of 2 of Kubrick films. There's 2 I could not mention. So, Dr Strangelove is bizarrely the least controversial of the 2. And again, it's about nuclear weapons, and this one takes a look at the military side of it, not what happened afterwards. This looks at the military side of why America and Russia were crazy. What were the absurdities of the mutual assured destruction policy, which didn't really make any sense ultimately. Why you should be worried about the generals and their ideology. Why you should be worried about the Russians and their technology. How flawed people were in power that would make you worry that all the bad decisions are getting made. People you should worry about in the military at various levels, including the people on the aircrafts who were delivering the bombs. Just everybody gets it. And all it makes you realise is this is the dumbest idea ever to have. And it's happening in real life. We have 2 sides of nuclear weapons pointing at each other. It's like the dumbest idea. This film was viewed as being traitorous to national security when it released, because it pointed out that it could go wrong, and it pointed out how absurd the whole thing was and how dumb so much of it was. And Kubrick was pretty much called a traitor, and then also a genius at the same time. So it was very controversial, and to some people it was morally reprehensible, just as much as pointing out the after effects of the bomb in The War Game was also viewed as morally reprehensible. That's how morally reprehensible the 60s were for the people in power, because they were insane. that these films point out the logic of it were viewed as a problem. Okay, number 7 is The Producers. Obviously this had to be in here. It's a comedy by Mel Brooks, his debut, where you have a Broadway producer and his accountant who decide to sell shares in the worst play ever made. A play so bad that it will be shut on its opening night because how bad it's going to be. So they sell so many shares in this thing, and to make money, and then it turns out the play's so terrible, it's so bad it's good. It's a hit, and they're in trouble now. This is a hilarious film, both for the idea of selling tons of shares for a play that they know is bad, which I'm sure has been done plenty of times. I don't think this is something that's never happened in real life, but also just how far they go. Like the producer is seducing all these old women for their money, and just how tasteless that gets at times. The play itself, which is a Springtime for Hitler, written by a fan of Hitler, directed by a gay man, an extravagantly gay man who can't direct, and it's absolutely so tasteless, it's wonderful. And of course, this whole thing is directed by a Jewish man who understands exactly what he's doing with the dark humour. So The Producers is wonderful, but it offended a lot of people when it first came out, and then eventually they get the joke. It was like, okay, this is funny. He's prodding this, bastards prodding this, we have to laugh with it. But I'm sure they weren't that happy. Some people weren't that happy about it. So number 6 is The Witchfinder General, which is basically Vincent Price in a Michael Reeves film. He's the Witchfinder Matthew Hopkins, who's basically a total hypocrite, who's burning people, these women as witches. He's torturing people, and he's just a sadist. He's just a horrible person. And this is not just the subject matter, but the kind of witch trial and how horrible it is. Just the atmosphere in this film is horrible and just depressing. And Vincent Price is not playing normal Vincent Price. He's playing it very seriously. He's playing a total psycho. And it just shows the power of the people in charge and how that power can be abused in any society. And just the darkness of the tone and how nothing works out made it not very well liked. And it was, even for the times, it was viewed as morally reprehensible for not having any hope at the end, where your hero turns into, is pretty much mad at the end of it, and he's probably going to go as crazy as a villain. So this one is sort of like The Producers, is gleefully more reprehensible and stuff that people would not like to see. Okay, number 5, we have The Night of the Living Dead. Yeah, that's just number 5. So this film came out in the late 60s, George Romero, independent film. It was zombies. It started as zombies. In ways that people are uncomfortable with the idea of zombies eating people. Coming from the graves, eating the living. A little girl turned into a zombie and killed and eaten her mother was not viewed as very nice. The down ending, having a black man as the hero and then shooting him. So for the racists, it was like, wait a minute, it's not a white guy's the hero, and then it's such a doomy film, and then, you know, the hero gets shot, and it's like, it takes everything that was safe in a horror movie and just exploded it. I mean, normally zombies were just stumbling monsters, didn't do anything. Romero added the cannibalism to it and just utterly changed the whole game, and just the whole sense of that swarm you can never quite escape because there's so many of them. And once you get bitten, you become one of them. It just becomes this infection that destroys humanity in a way that was very creepy to the population, who felt they had a swarm of, you know, hippies and peaceniks and a society that was collapsing with people objecting to the war. And there was just this idea of a rotten society, and it's reprehensible for the gore, but it's also suggesting society collapsing. So number 4 is The Wild Bunch. The Wild Bunch is, you know, an obvious one for this list. Sam Peckinpah taking his a lot of character actors down to the West as they're basically robbers who escape to the West after a job going wrong, hiding out there, getting into fights there, and end up having a nihilistic. They're getting chased by the American government. They've got problems of their own with the Mexicans, and it's just nihilistic about what's the end result for outlaws in the West. It's like there's no real escape. You're going to die a horrible, painful death, and the nihilism comes from the violence and how brutal it is and how beautiful it is, and just a sense of doom within the violence. And that violence should be ugly. There is doom within violence, but just point it out is something that people don't like. They want the fantasy of it looks beautiful, or we can distance ourselves from it. We don't want the actual ugliness of it. It's like how ugly and horrible violence actually is. They don't want that, so that was made it very morally reprehensible, both in the politics of these guys are doomed, and these old actors you saw in all these other films are now the villains and they're doomed and there's no escape for them, and just the way it's done. So this was a controversial film, made a lot of money, but it made people very uneasy. Number 3 is Peeping Tom, the only film on the list that ended the career of its director. And it's wonderful. It's about a serial killer who's also a cameraman, and the idea of voyeurism and where it leads if unchecked. And if a kid's brought up wrong from a psycho father who's doing experiments on how being watched affects kids, and how that cycle starts to go into the kid's mind, and just the whole idea of what we do when we watch something, what we do when we watch a film, how we attach ourselves to the characters, how we attach ourselves to these people who aren't real but who we see as real in some way, and how that affects us. And that's part of the scare of the film. So it's not a film about jump scares or anything, it's just the atmosphere of I'm implicated in this because I like films, and a lot of people did not like that. Because at that point we're 30-40 years into cinema being a dominant cultural thing, and people were watching these films all the time, and then to have a big debate with Michael Pell saying there could be something dodgy here, they did not like it. His career was over after this film. He made a few other films, but his career was essentially over. This one just freaked the British press out, and they way overreacted. But it's a wonderful film. It's just so good. Number 2 is Bonnie and Clyde, which, it kind of, in some ways, upset people more than World Bunch, because these were not old guys who had their lives and were getting killed. This was these two young people, Faye Dunaway and Warren Beatty, and a gang, going around the countryside, stealing, robbing banks, looking wonderful, and they were an inspiration to the youth, but they were also rebelling against society in a way that society didn't like. So it was a completely morally reprehensible, even though they get killed beautifully at the end with these beautiful shots in slow motion. So they got their just desserts. People were so into the fantasy of that, and the fantasy of misbehaviour became something tangible. So it became something that was not liked by a certain generation, like the older generation who'd fought during the war, and suddenly they realising their kids had become these idiots who loved this stuff about these killers being cool. When, and anyone who's fought in the war realised that these killers were not cool at all, they were psychos. So it created this sense of, oh my god, but they weren't seeing what the kids were seeing, which was just the style of it and the fantasy and the kind of idea of sin within a movie, something you don't do in real life, but within a movie is enjoyable. So it was like two generations, one thinking it was morally reprehensible, another generation thinking it was wonderful because it was free and it wasn't really life, which I think the older generation didn't quite get. So that was number 2. But number 1 has to be Lolita. It's about a paedophile who, goes around the country with this young girl, and you're sympathetic towards the paedophile in this film. That does not go down well. It's a wonderful Kubrick film. It's very romantic, but it's also romantic with a dark undertone of what do you really see in another person? What are you really thinking? What's the darkness in your soul because Kubrick takes the subject matter and plays it up both as a criminal thing of, you should feel guilt awful about this, watching this, but also showing the romance of what's going on in this guy's head and what's happened to this guy and how it relates to how people see their partners and relationships that aren't illegal. And it's just this Kubrick messing with you in a way that people are very uncomfortable. Kubrick wasn't a big fan of this film either. He didn't think he nailed it. But it's one of those things where a director didn't think they nailed it and the audience can see, oh yeah, you nailed it quite well. It's not the book, it's something else, but what you're doing is really interesting. It's one of those things, I think if you want the book, it's not quite that, but what it is something different. And it's got its own validity that doesn't have to be the book. So that's the top 10 morally reprehensible 1960s movies. I hope you enjoyed it. There shall be more. So I'll see you later. Right, bye.